you still see the flags everywhere. The stark black background with the iconic silhouette of a Vietnam prisoner of war, and the words, "You are not forgotten." Welcome to the Beyond Survival podcast, preserving the voices, stories, and legacies of Vietnam POWs. Here's your host, Susan Page Coffey.
Thank you so much for joining us today, again, on Beyond Survival, our podcast. And my late husband, Jerry Coffey, was a Vietnam War POW and held for over 7 years. He always likes to add those 9 days. He came home after all those years convinced that we as people cannot just stay in survival mode in our own prisons of despair for whatever reason, but we must go beyond survival to emerge better than before. And the keys for him to that survival was going beyond survival was simply faith. 4 aspects of faith, specifically faith in self, others, country, and God. With Jerry's experience in mind, we at Beyond Survival feel obligated to educate all generations about the extraordinary courage of the American prisoners of war held in North Vietnam, and more importantly, the lessons learned so that we can apply those in our own lives. Sadly, Jerry filed his last flight plan in November 2021, but today we welcome a guest again. Everett was with us last time, and this is part 2 of his interview, but he knew Jerry very well, kind of in a most bizarre way, as a fellow POW with him locked in a prison cell. So he's coming back to finish our interview, and we can't wait because Everett is very busy, and he has more to tell about his 8.5 years in prison, longest held POW who was shot down and captured in North Vietnam especially, but the second longest prisoner of war to ever be held in American history. So anyway, Everett, it's always pretty great to be the first in something, but you know, you were the first person shot down in North Vietnam. So it was kind of a dubious distinction. You'll have to listen to our first episode to really get more of the details on that. But you were originally from Salinas, California, retired from the Navy as a commander in 1980. You earned a Silver Star, but you are about to receive, by an act of Congress, the Congressional Gold Medal, the oldest and highest civilian honor in the United States. And the luminaries who have been given this Congressional Gold Medal are such people as George Washington. So you're in a wonderful company in this, and you deserve it. So
thank
we'll
you,
just go
Susan.
on. You're welcome. You deserve it, Everett. You were the POW that all the other men who subsequently were shot down would talk about. Where's Everett? Where's Everett? And when some of them got shot down, maybe about 6 months after you, they were looking for you. They wanted to figure out where you were. They knew you had been captured. So I know you've heard some of your cohorts, such as Bob Shoemaker and others, talk about how they were looking for you. Tell me about that, and how being there alone and knowing that some other POWs, you felt that that had been shot down, but that you were nowhere near them. So kind of describe that before we get into getting back to where we left off in the last episode.
When I was shot down, I was 26, but I looked like I was 18, very young. And so when the Vietnamese captured me, their high-ranking officers looked at me and they figured, my goodness, what's this young kid, or must have been thinking like that, what's this young kid doing here? I mean, he's just a kid. What does he know? And so they took an approach that they were going to educate me about their history and all that. And so the interrogation was basically, very long. It took about 6 weeks. But they, and I played along with them. I didn't really know anything that was really highly secret or anything like that. But I was very curious about their history and what have you. So after that, for the first 6 months, I think they figured, well, we got a fellow there that he's a good kid, and I just didn't know what was going to happen to me. And then the war started. 6 months later, I found out. I saw where they had shot down another person. And I could do this by looking out the crack in my door of the cell, and I could. I was in about a 10 by 12 foot room that was near the main entrance, but inside the main entrance to the prison compound. And I could monitor the traffic, what was going on, and they used to bring my food in from outside. And the next thing I knew, they were bringing in 2 trays of food. And then next thing I knew, I was watching 3 trays, and the food would go off in different directions. So I knew basically the guys were being held. And so, but when the bombing started, they figured, I was compassionate to their goals and what have you. And now that I knew more about their history, I would be helpful to them. Well, and there was no way I was going to help them understand military technology, understand what the pilots, how they flew and what they did in terms of their bombing runs and what have you. So when they realized I was not going to help, they stuck me in another area of the prison in a 7 by 7 foot cell. It was like a box and really confined. And they stuck me in there for the next 7 months, really. So I was completely out of touch with anybody. It was
what do you suppose their reasoning was for keeping you separated from them?
Well, it's because they were disappointed. I think that they were disappointed that I wasn't going to help them.
They were just punishing you, basically.
Yeah, and well, I guess. Anyway, they stuck me in there, and I knew that the others were in a separate area. But you're right, they were looking for me. And when they came in, and then one day when they put me into that cell, it was like February, middle of February of 1965. So I'd been there about 6 months. And I was there the following summer, the following August, I happened to get my plate. I was fed twice a day. And one day I was sitting there and waiting for the turnkey to come, and so I could put out my bowl. And I happened to turn it over, and on the bottom of the bowl, there was some scratching, and the scratching was, "Is there a WAP in Hanoi?" Well, I knew what that meant. And I think about a couple of weeks before that, I had heard some crying and screaming, and but it was over the wall of where I was. And that's where it was coming from. So I figured, and then a few days later there was an answer. Alone, it's near to God, and I'm trying to decipher this.
So wait, let me just go back to, is there a WAP? Are you talking about the bad reference, a very disrespectful reference to Mexican Americans or Mexicans?
No. WAPs were Italians.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
those were terms they.
So a lot of Americans can tell the difference in those days sometimes.
Anyway, growing up in certain areas, it was. Well, you wouldn't. I don't think you would.
It was the big disparaging.
But back in 80 years, 85, 90 years ago, when I was born, everybody called each other different ethnic names.
Yes.
And so so I happened to get a hold of something, a sharp object, and I scratched my name. And the answer came and this all took days and weeks, and every day I would look at the bottom of the bowls after I finished my meal to look for messages, and sure enough, one day it said, "Hi, EA. It's the score is the score is Navy 7, Air Force 7." And I'm thinking, what the heck they want me to know the score of the Army, of the Navy Air Force game? What they're telling me is that there were 7 Air Force POWs and 7 Navy POWs. And so one day that after I had heard and I figured out that the fellow just over the wall of the area where I was an American POW, and I figured he must be hurting. I had two towels that were like rags that I used to use when I'd go out and throw a bucket of water over me, and they would let me out for 10 minutes. And in front of this little cell block, there was like a little courtyard with a cistern and the water, so you could wash your clothes and you could throw water on you and bathe over yourself. And so anyway, and my cell block, there were 4 cells in there. The rest of the cells were occupied by Vietnamese prisoners. And so I gave one of the rag towels to the turnkey, and I pointed in that direction, and he took it, and I guess the Vietnamese figured that I knew that there were other Americans there. So that's when, a few nights later, in September of '65, middle of the night, they came and had me roll up my mat and mosquito net and blindfolded me, handcuffed me. And anytime you left the cell, you were blindfolded and handcuffed, and led me out. And they put me in the back of a Jeep, and I'm sitting there, and I could feel there's a body next to me, a person. So I gave my name, and the fellow didn't say anything. So I repeated it. He goes, "Yeah, I heard you. He said it was Phil Butler. He was just stunned that I had I was next to him. And then here comes another person, and they had Hayden Lockhart, and then Garino, and Garino was the fellow that was hurting and so they had the 4 of us, and they all, we're blindfolded, and we're not supposed to talk and all that, and they all said, where have you been? Where have you been? We're looking for you. And I said, I've been right here, all the time. So it was interesting because that September 18th of '65 was the night that they moved me in with the rest of them, and they drove us out to a camp out in the foothills, in the hills out there that we later called the Briar Patch.
Yes.
It was a POW camp with no electricity and no running water, and it was very, very basic.
Most people think that it was just one big prison, the Hanoi Hilton or Wallow prison, but you had several little camps around you, or prison.
Oh yeah, we had different
where
sections.
They kept you. How many were there?
Well, there were many.
Briar Patch.
Oh, the Briar Patch was another camp about 40 miles west of Hanoi. And then we also, later they opened up other camps as more guys were shot down. They opened up another camp on the outskirts of Hanoi that we called the Zoo. And then they opened up smaller camps. And I think the best known of the camps that were outside of Hanoi at distance was one where they called Sante, where they had a rescue attempt. And that was one
Yes.
of the outlying camps also. But I got to spend a lot of time at the Briar Patch. We were there for a while. Then
Well,
a
Everett,
couple of
describe
months came
describe just
back.
being. I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you just for
Go
a
ahead.
moment. But this is for my. I'm hearing things I haven't heard about. I've read some of this in your book, but I love hearing this from you because those moments like that, where your first discovery, well, their first discovery that they were meeting you must have been just amazing to them, and it must have been shocking, but also a joyous time for you. So there were 14
sure.
of you in the Briar Patch after you
Yeah.
got transported that 40 miles, and then at that point, once you got into were they cells or were they rooms that had several men to them? What
Oh, no,
describe the
no.
Briar
They
Patch a
were,
little bit.
well, the Briar Patch was made up of little buildings. Each building had 4 cells, and each cell held 2 prisoners. And each building had a little wall around it. So there was a series of little courtyards with each with a building in the middle. And outside the cell, the door was a vat, and the guards would come, and the workers, the people that they had working around there, would fill the vat with water. And so that was your bath, your laundry area, and what have you. And then when you went, but the rest of the time you were in a cell. It was concrete floor
Yes.
and two wooden beds. They're just slabs of wood.
Uh-huh.
And
So
then
Everett, who
you
was
had
your first cellmate there? Who was that?
Well, when we got back to the new camp, they were all opening up after a month or 6 weeks at the Briar Patch. My first time there, they moved us back to Hanoi to an outpoint. They were building a new camp. They were converting old buildings into a prison, and we call that place the zoo. And I got my first cellmate, a guy named Tom Barrett, who was an Air Force first lieutenant, backseater of a Air Force F4, and so he was about the same age, and we were cellmates for a long time. This was November of '65, and we remained cellmates for almost a year. And then they would rotate people around, but it was just the 2 of us. We were never in a. I was never in a cell with more than 2 until about late 1969, when they started crowding people into these small cells. And then they were started to expand as things improved. They started making the cells bigger.
So Everett, when you were moved out from the Briar Patch and then eventually into the zoo where you got your first cellmate, this must have been such a greater upgrade basically from where you were in Wallow.
Oh, it was.
And
Oh,
you
yeah.
must have-
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when they first moved me out with the prisoners, and we first arrived at the Briar Patch that night. That was with Garino, Butler, and Lockhart. They put me in a cell with Larry Garino, and they said, "No talk, keep silent." And so, but I was so excited, and he was so excited, we couldn't stop talking to each other. And we paid no attention to them as they told us to keep quiet. So they yanked me out of that cell and put me into another cell around in the same little building, but a different cell. And each cell had a window that was facing out, and all the cells the windows were facing in opposite directions. So you couldn't look, you couldn't see each other, but you could hear and talk.
So did they put you with a new cellmate, or did they?
No, I was solo until
Okay.
I was in there with Larry for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then they yanked me out. and I remained solo until Tom Barrett a year later.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and but being in a camp with others was like being in Coney Island. I mean, it was just I felt like I had been liberated, honest to God.
Oh,
And,
Everett, and so we skipped over a little bit when you said
Yeah.
they would feed you. I've read about what they fed you early in the early days of your captivity. Can you describe some of the worst of the worst?
Well, the worst was when I initially arrived in Hanoi, and they were what I figured they were prepping me getting ready so they could start interrogating me, and the food was just lousy. It was inedible. I don't know why they came up with this food, but it was very greasy, and all kinds of little, little like shelled food.
Yeah.
There were one time there was a fish, complete with the head and everything, just floating in grease. Oh, and then there was the bird, a little bird.
Ah, the bird.
Feathers and everything, and and I just forced it open. There was.
So in other words, they put
but-
a bird that had not uncooked bird with feathers and beak and the whole works, and legs and claws
Yeah.
on
yeah.
your
well,
plate.
it was cooked. Oh no,
was
that was
cooked.
your plate. It was cooked, but in grease. And when I got it, it was floating in the grease that they had cooked it in, but it was completely, feather heads, claws, everything. And that was my meal, and that was just before I started. So they were setting me up for interrogation. And I was sick for a couple of weeks. I just really sick. Diarrhea and dysentery. I
Yes.
had dysentery is when you're passing blood
Yes.
and throwing up blood and passing blood. Diarrhea is diarrhea. We all know
Yes.
what that is. But
So,
I had
yes.
this. I had.
So when
And
you
then
when you
they-
had
and
that
then-
reaction, did you just stop eating altogether, or did they
yeah.
get the
Well,
picture and start feeding you something better for your stomach?
No, I tried to eat a lot of that food, and then when I got real sick with dysentery, they brought me a chicken soup, a broth with a little bit of chicken meat. It was just a broth, and that's what I could keep down. So I eat that, and then I would tell them I'm sick, and they would bring me the food. And then one night, they brought a tray. They would bring in these bowls, and they would be covered, and so I would uncover it. And one night they came in, and they brought in so I had a little table, about a 2-foot square table, and a chair in that cell. And so I sat down and I uncovered it, and what I see? I was an omelet, honest to God omelet. And the next one had a slice of bread, French bread. And I cried. I ate that, and I actually had tears coming down. It was, and then I kept thinking, they knew what I could eat. And sure enough, the next day, here comes several officers, and it was my interrogation started. And they made reference to the food. The food is much better now, right? And I said,
Yes.
yeah. And they said, yeah, okay, so you will cooperate. And I said, well, I didn't know what they wanted at the time, but they basically told me they were going to have me tell them everything I knew, and I could never reveal anything militarily that was classified or what have you. And it turns out I really didn't have to, because they started out by giving me a history lesson about Vietnam and the French and the colonialists. and on and on. And then they had all the information about me from the hometown newspapers. And when I was shot down, the American media had, I was in all the news, and so they had all that information, my family, my history, where I grew up. I mean, they knew everything about me that you'd want to know. What I didn't realize till later, what was in my favor is that I was a Mexican American, and my father was a worker, and so we came from the working class, the proletariat.
Yes.
And
the
we
communist,
were,
yes.
we were
You were
subject.
one of them.
I was one of them,
They're-
and my dad was not a senator or a wealthy. We didn't live in a big home, so we were one of the oppressed in our country. So that's why they
Yes.
wanted me to, learn
Okay.
about them and be a good guy. And so that was the approach that they took towards me, and that was what I played along with that for.
It must,
until I
Everett,
came.
as smart as you are and as educated as you were at that time, it must not have been very difficult to figure out what they were doing, softening you up, hurting you with the bad, horrible food, and then softening you up, and then thinking they could change you and coerce you into believing their way. I know Jerry described this as the entire time he was in prison. They
Oh, yeah.
kept trying to convert him to communism, the People's Republic of Vietnam, and it wasn't the People's Republic. It was the Communist Republic. It wasn't even a republic.
Well,
But
by
anyway,
time-
they never gave up. They never gave up on that. And I'm just going to add this in. I've read a lot about this, and they had three different divisions in the country. One was the military, the second was the propaganda division, and the third was what they call subterfuge. And that subterfuge is a name I don't know where they got that as an English name, a word, but that was to do what you're talking about, just to try to convince and sell the idea of communism to everybody. And it was sort of like being, being in a church, and you're supposed to be out proselytizing and spreading the good news.
Yeah.
So their
Right.
good news was communism. And is that kind of what you probably figured that out quite quickly?
Yeah, I was the first one that underwent that, because they used the same approach as you said to everybody following, and we would have to sit there and listen to lectures and go to, and a lot of that when we would go to interrogation, and then we came back, and of course we all communicated using the tap code on the wall. The first thing we did coming back to our cells is from interrogation was what happened, and they say we say, well, it's just another English lesson. We all knew that we should sit there and listen to them practicing their English, but trying to indoctrinate us in socialism and
Yes.
and the Vietnamese fight for independence and freedom, quote freedom. The whole population they were brainwashed.
Yes.
And it didn't take long to figure it out, but it was revealing how they could turn on the population off and on just like that.
Yeah. So Everett, I want to go back to that time in prison when you were alone and you created yourself. You talk about this in the last episode, but created yourself sort of a altar so you could have church service for yourself. But in your book and in other books, you describe how you would do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, figure out where maybe America would be, while you were there, just locating that direction and standing. Can you describe that patriotism that you guys continue to have?
When I first joined the others in September of '65, one of the first thing I learned was the tap code, how to tap on the wall. And the second thing I was taught was every Sunday morning, they would have on a given signal. We would all stand in our cells, whether we had cellmates or solitaire, and say the Lord's Prayer. And then that was followed by facing east east was towards the United States, towards home. And we would stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And so that was our church services, the Lord's Prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. But it was all done at the same time every Sunday morning.
Wow.
And that was something that continued throughout the years. It never stopped, no matter where we were, under the harshest conditions. And unless you were just strapped down to a bed, and leg irons or what have you, at least you could pray along. But that was our church services. It was a ritual. The Vietnamese could not stop us from doing that. And we were not supposed to have church services. That was against the camp regulations.
Yeah.
And we were not supposed to. And so that was something that we held steadfast. Every single one of us.
Well, did that.
I
mean, I know you're a believer. I know you are, Everett, and I know you're very much a man of faith. And maybe that was God's intervention, that they didn't clamp down on you guys. Maybe God was intervening for that moment each time, each Sunday.
We had to do it covertly.
Uh-huh.
So we would not be seen nor heard. And of course, in our cells, we had to, we couldn't talk very loud anyway, so we actually whispered
The pledge.
the prayer and the pledge.
Yes.
But when we were caught, then you were punished. And,
when you say punished, what would be I know there are probably levels of punishment, and we know the harshest was probably the ropes.
Well,
but
the harshest.
What would your punishment be just for that, for catching you doing that?
Anywhere from beatings to putting you in ice, or putting you in a hole without any blankets, mosquito net, for several days. And those are examples of that. Or sitting on a stool and not letting you sleep, having to write an apology. And of course, we refused to write that, so we just sat there on a stool and for days until they. And then they took away the food, and then they would take away the water, and until you wrote something. After a while, they didn't care when you did write something, it was not legible. I mean, it was just
right.
It was useless.
So when you were, and I'm sure the leg stocks and the handcuffs, for up to how many days? I might have asked you this before, but it's worth repeating. What was the longest you were ever held in leg stocks?
In leg stocks and leg irons, we were there a week. The three of us, there were three in a cell at one point, and myself, Tom Barrett, and a fellow named Red Berg.
Oh, Red Berg,
a good friend of ours, and we were, and so they took Red out to interrogation, and the Americans, we had dropped we had hit a target which was not too far from the camp, the zoo, and so when he says, "What do you think about that?" Hitting. They always claim that we hit schools and nurseries, hospitals and pagodas.
Yeah.
That was all what we were. And on this particular day, Red was asked, "Well, what do you think about that?" And he says, "Well, you have your ammo dumps right next to, if you wouldn't build your ammunition dump so close to this prison, and we wouldn't have had any bombing nearby." Well, they got mad at that answer, so he was opposite, and they took the three of us, and they put us in another small shed, and we were in leg irons for about a week, and handcuffed behind our backs. It was hard to lay down. You had to sort of twist your body around.
Did they ever let you out for any moments at all?
Yeah, they let us out once a day to. We actually we couldn't hold our body function.
Yeah, you had to go to the bathroom. now.
So we once a day for about 10, 15 to wash our clothes out and to clean ourselves, and then back into the leg irons.
And then how were you to eat?
Well, they would unhandcuff us and give us our food,
Yeah.
but we were still in leg irons, and that was not easy. But it got to be, after a while, we didn't know how long we were going to be in there, in the situation. And it became sort of comical.
It must have been.
We were
well, it must-
hurting.
Yeah.
We were hurting so bad, but it was such a ridiculous situation to be in that we would tell each other jokes and actually start laughing.
So on that note, how would you rank, with faith and resilience and all of those things that you guys possessed, how would you rank sense of humor and
Sense of humor was
helping you survive?
extremely necessary. You had we used to pass each other, through, you gotta have a sense of humor, or else you shouldn't have signed up. It was you used to pass that down the wall because, we were constantly being punished for one thing or
Yes.
another in ourselves. Yeah.
Yes.
It was hard. It was looking back, it was hard, but we got, we sort of just became numb to it. And
Yeah.
I remember a fellow Bob Purcell, we called him Percy,
Person.
that they would punish him every day. He was breaking the camp regulations, and they would take him out and they would hit him and beat him. And so one day he goes up, he says, can you hit me on this other side of the face? It's pretty sore on my right side. Can you hit me? And when he got back in the cell, he passed out. That was passed down the road, and everybody got a chuckle out of that one.
His nickname was Percy, right? He
We called him
provided a lot
Percy.
of humor and laughter for you guys. I've read some about him. We'll
Yeah,
have to-
he was
we'll have to-
he was a very he was a very jovial guy. He was a Air Force F-100. It's a reconnaissance photo. It's a photo, and he would yell out when people. He would yell out, "We kill them with film." He would kill them. In other words, the only weapon he had was film on his airplane. He was a reconnaissance photo pilot.
We kill him with film.
We kill them with
I
film.
can relate to that since Jerry was a
Yeah.
Reiki pilot, a reconnaissance pilot too.
Definitely, yeah. But
So-
Percy would yell that out, and that was you could always count on him for doing something like that.
For doing something funny.
And
Oh
they
my gosh.
Then they go in there and open his cell and tell him, knock him around for not for yelling out like that.
But I want to ask you about the traitors that were within prison. And this is a very important thing to you and was to Jerry. And first of all, I want to talk about it I will try to keep it short if we can. But when Jerry had passed about 3 months later, I want to tell the listening audience this. Everett called me, and I was in a bad way. I was in despair. I was in a terrible way, missing Jerry and all of that, grieving. So Everett said, Susan, Edison Miller, who was considered one of the worst of who we feel betrayed the country, Edison Miller, and I can say this because that's what you said, and you were there. I didn't see it happen, but you said Edison Miller died the day before Jerry did, and he's obviously going to be buried in the same section, maybe right next to Jerry, and we can't have that. And now describe why, Everett. Why?
Well, Edison Miller was a collaborator with the Vietnamese, and Jerry and I.
Now he
were,
was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, right?
He was,
pilot.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Colonel or something. Yeah.
He and another fellow, Navy commander, were collaborators, and Edison Miller and the other fellow were our guards for a while. Your husband Jerry and I and others were, by that time we were living in improved conditions, and this was after 1970, and the policies had changed, and they had the Vietnamese knocked off the rough stuff, the bad stuff, So we were just, all not normal, but better conditions. And so these two fellows that used to come, the turncoats, they would come in and they would unlock us and bring us food, and they were, and then they would lock us up at night.
Oh, man.
We try to communicate. When we would communicate with the other buildings, we developed a way to do that. We always had to be on guard against Miller and the other fellow, because they would turn us in.
They were snitches.
They would turn us. They would turn us in to the camp commander. And one time they turned me in, and I went there. And then another time, Jerry, I forget why, but he was in, and on that occasion, Miller and the camp commander was sitting on one side of the table, and Jerry was on the other on a stool, and they were like co-camp commanders. They were like trustees, and they were they refused to follow the code of conduct. They refused to follow the orders, military orders. Mm-hmm. And when we came back, our senior officers tried to court-martial them. When the war was over and we came back, Edison Miller had an attorney named Melvin Bell, and Edison Miller fought the court-martial, and the Secretary of the Navy decided it was not going to do the country any good to go through this, because Melvin Bell was all ready to depose the Vietnamese and the camp guards and the commanders on behalf of Miller on the court-martial. And that was going to turn into a long, not good thing. And so the Secretary of the Navy decided it was in the best interest to just drop everything. So he managed later on to clear his record, and when he retired from the military, Miller received a honorable discharge, or I don't know if it was honorable or not, but it was enough to allow him to, when he died, to be buried at Arlington Cemetery. And if you had a dishonorable discharge, you could not be buried in Arlington.
Right.
So, but he had. So when he passed, like you said, it was just before Jerry, your husband, passed, and I figured, oh God, we're going to be buried next to each other. We tried to stop it.
I did. I stopped it. I mean, I didn't, but I felt like Everett. This was so painful to you to think.
Yeah.
That first of all, to have to relive that whole episode, and then to think that Jerry might be there next to him, that.
That was,
Jerry would have, if there's such a thing in a cemetery, Jerry would have been continuing to try to talk Edison out of betraying his country. That was Jerry.
Yeah, that was Jerry. Jerry was a good person, good guy, a good friend. Right. Jerry, your husband had a knack that he could always tell someone who was going through bad time, and he would do his best to comfort him. And he did that to me, and I always will thank him, respect him, and love him for that.
I know.
Pulling me through some tough times. But besides that, we all hung in together, and to this, I told my children that when I eventually pass, and I would want to be buried in Arlington Cemetery, but I don't want to be anywhere close to that Edison Miller.
Well, I've got all my notes that I sent them. I have it all. A lot of time copying stuff and putting it together, so I've got it all together. So when you need me, when the call happens,
keep the notes. I'll tell the boys you have the notes.
I will.
Okay.
Well, that was when you put it in the context of the heroes and all the things that the rest of you did to taking the torture, taking the interrogations, taking the stress, taking the horrible food, taking the solitary confinement, always continuing to be away from your family and your friends and your loved ones, it makes them just small in comparison. I mean, very, very small, tiny. So I believe that focusing on them, I just had to bring that out because I think it's something our listeners need to hear about, because that did happen. And these were the guys that went before people like Jane Fonda and others to proclaim that there was not bad treatment inside those walls but behind them, and that they were getting really humane and wonderful treatment. So we just have to try. That's what I'm really trying to do with this podcast and with our Going Beyond Survival, our Beyond Survival work, is to show people what propaganda can do and how you can propagandize a situation to where you don't get the truth. And we're just trying to bring out the truth and what happened to you men in there, you brave heroes of ours. And one time, Everett, you said to me recently that you just don't think people will ever know what you went through. Well, we won't.
No.
We won't know because we weren't there. But the more you talk about it, I would say you're the one that really talks about it more than anybody now, to your last breath, to tell people the honor that you guys brought home from staying loyal to your America, to your country. And at this time of our history, this birthday celebration of our history, it's so important to bring these stories out to the public so they can understand how great our military men and women are and the sacrifices they make and the way they did back in the beginning of our nation. So I'm just so happy to be able to talk to you like this, and it must.
Well, thank you. But you know, Susan, the early shoot downs, the ones that were shot down in '65, like Jerry and others, '66. Over half of them are gone, are passed on. The others that were younger, 67, 68, and then the end of the war, there were a bunch that were shot down at 72, the younger ones. Mm-hmm. But it was the ones that were early had it the worst. And then conditions started to improve in 68 and after that. But the ones that we had it, physically, not just the beatings and the torture, but the living conditions. And it was not easy. It was easy, but we hung together and we helped each other and we took care of each other.
Yes.
And that was necessary for for a lot of the guys.
For survival.
For survival, and so.
Well, Everett, this is a chapter of this that you might not want to talk about. We don't have to talk about it a lot, but I do know that it must have been I'm going to ask you one question first of all. What was the hardest thing, besides the torture? Let's just put that aside. What was the hardest thing that you had to go through and experience in that time?
Well, there were several. There were several things. Of course, the initial time, the fear, the not knowing what was going to happen to us, and then just being there. And then later on, it was getting the news of my spouse that left, no longer was waiting. I learned that about a year before we came home, and that was difficult. But again, without the help of each other, I don't know what we would have done. When you say what was the hardest, there were at each stage.
It's so relative. It's all hard.
Each stage, as time passed, each stage there was something that was really hard. But you just you worked the way through it. I mean, you had to do it. Yeah.
So, give us. As we move through this, I know that your great reward was your wife Tammy, who you've been married to now over 50 years, and you met her soon after you came home,
Right.
And you have this wonderful marriage, 2 sons, and
God,
again, yeah, it's just been, you've had the most amazing life, Everett. You've about gotten every award that can be gotten, and now with this congressional, this
I've been
act of
very fortunate.
Congress.
Yeah.
I
Well,
know.
I've been very fortunate because a lot of the guys survived the
Yes.
experience of being a PB, and then I finished my military career. But then I went on and served under President Reagan, and I was the deputy of the VA system, and we did try to do a lot of good for the veterans. Working hard for them, dealing with Agent Orange issues, and then dealing with post-traumatic stress. And then one accomplishment that I feel pretty good about was setting up all of the Vietnam veteran counseling centers around the country. We started about 180
Yes.
of them, and we began the transition. A lot of update and modernization of the facilities. The electronic healthcare records started back then when we were there. I was at the VA. Which is the switch from old inpatient medicine to walk-in and outpatient type of medicine that the country was going through,
Well,
and we were
that's
following along that.
wow,
Yeah,
that's an amazing contribution to
that was a
getting those
lot of
systems and records. Good heavens,
well,
what a
getting
feat.
and getting the Congress to fund them, and we had to prove that it was worth it at the time. So all of these things that took place, today I was Tammy does, we do a lot of work with the uniformed services. It's the military medical school that produces doctors for the military.
Which your son went to and graduated from.
And I was on the
Brian.
board. I was on the board for 21 years. Me and my son graduated from that. These are people that stay career doctors in the military
Yes.
services. All of this is just. I
Yeah.
think it's things that we can do to help.
So Everett, this is sort of, I don't know, philosophical. I'm not sure how you'd look at it, but if you just kind of look back at your life and you say, okay, when I graduated from college at Santa Clara, and I was going to be this, I was going to go this way, and then you joined the Navy, and then you got shot down, first man. And then the way that the trajectory of your life has gone, you almost, I'm not sure, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but from my view, it was almost meant to be that you were chosen to have this life rather than the one you might have thought you wanted. What do you think about that?
Well, I've always looked forward. I never looked back. I graduated with electrical engineering, and then I went into the Navy. Never used that training, but it was always looking forward, and I was very fortunate. I had a friend watch over me my life.
Yes.
That was my God,
Yes.
and I used to have a lot of conversations, a lot of conversations every day, and I'm very fortunate because he watched over me my whole life.
Everett, that's just a wonderful testimony. I think we will hit the hearts of all the. I think crying over your omelet got me the most about this interview, but that is a testimony that our listeners can take home and say he never leaves us, not in a prison cell, not with a plate of uncooked, greasy, almost uncooked, greasy bird in front of you. He never leaves us, and so he's never left you. And I look forward to a lot more years with you, Everett, and our country really values your sacrifice and what you've done. Like you said, don't look back to that always, but look at what you've done and are still doing with our, in our country. So I think this is a good place to wrap it up. There's so many other things we could talk about, but maybe we'll have you for a third time. We'll see. But listen, God bless America. God bless you, Everett, and your family, and all our fighting men and women who are out there on land and sea. We just appreciate you so much, and even especially today, and you might say this too, Everett, to our Vietnam veterans who never got the homecoming that you guys got, and they deserved it. Every single one of them. To them, I say thank you.
That to these kids, yeah, they were kids, came home, and you're absolutely right.
Yes.
They deserve a thank you and welcome back.
Yes, yes, amen. God bless you. God bless America.
You too. Thank you much.
For more information about the Beyond Survival podcast, go to goingbeyondsurvival.org.